Could you survive the coldest nights in a medieval castle?
Force of a hammer.
No, and the reasons are not what you might think. Modern people imagine medieval castles as majestic and romantic places. But what if I told you that everything you believed was untrue? Behind the thick stone walls lay not a fairy tale, but a harsh daily struggle for survival, especially when night fell. In a world without central heating, double-glazed windows, or electricity, the cold was not just an inconvenience. It was a silent, omnipresent enemy that penetrated even the most protected chambers. Watch the video to the end to find out what clever tricks and everyday techniques allowed castle dwellers to stay warm within the icy stone walls, and why the most ordinary bed was a complex engineering feat for survival. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of medieval castles. The cold in a castle was not just a physical sensation, it was a state of mind. Constant chills shaped a particular perception of the world, full of superstitions and fears. The long dark nights seemed endless, and every gust of wind howling through the chimney was considered an omen. People lived in semi-darkness, where shadows from candlelight danced on the walls, creating bizarre and frightening images. It was the perfect environment for stories about ghosts and evil spirits inhabiting the cold, unused parts of the castle. The feeling of constant vulnerability to the elements affected behavior. People became more irritable and withdrawn, and the short daylight hours dictated a strict routine. With the onset of twilight, life in the castle came to a standstill, concentrated in just a few lit and heated rooms. The stone walls themselves, which accumulated cold during the day, began to give it back at night. This created an oppressive feeling, as if you were in an icy tomb. The walls seemed not like a protection, but a source of constant threat. Psychologically, people sought to gather together, seeking not only physical, but also moral warmth. Loneliness in a cold castle was synonymous with danger. Therefore, even noble lords rarely slept alone in their chambers. This constant struggle against the cold-tempered character, but also depleted strength. People got used to discomfort that would seem unbearable to modern man. The ability to endure the cold was as important a quality as the ability to wield a sword.
To the crown. May we enjoy this.
For them, warmth was the highest form of luxury, far more valuable than gold or silk. Control over heat sources meant power and high status. The simple right to sit closer to the fire was a privilege that was fought for. At the same time, the constant lack of light and heat led to seasonal apathy. Winter was a time of survival, not activity. All energy was spent simply on living to see spring. It was not life, but a slow wait for warmth. Every cold night survived was a small victory. People rejoiced at the first ray of morning sun, not because of its beauty, but because of the promise of a few hours of warmth. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next explorations of the mysteries of the past. We are very interested in hearing your point of view. What do you think about how constant cold could have affected the mentality and culture of medieval society? Write about it in the comments. Are you ready to learn the harsh truth about the main, but extremely inefficient, source of heat in a damp medieval castle? At the geometric center of the main ceremonial hall, the hall, there was always a strategically located huge fireplace or open hearth capable of accommodating an entire log. It was not only a practical source of vital heat, but also the most important social center of the entire castle life, a place for gatherings, feasts, councils, and relaxation. The hearth was the heart of the castle, not metaphorically, but literally. Without fire, the castle was dead, cold, and uninhabitable, turning from a home into a stone tomb where it was impossible to survive the winter without a constant flame providing heat, light, and the ability to cook food, combining three critical functions of survival in one point in space. It was here by the life-giving fire that absolutely all the inhabitants of the castle gathered every evening, from the powerful lord and owner to the lowest servant in the kitchen. Seating by the fire was strictly regulated by unbreakable rules and clearly reflected the rigid social hierarchy of feudal society. The higher your status and rank in society, the closer you were allowed to sit to the life-saving flames and warmth, according to the tradition. The Lord sat closest to the fire, warming himself best, while the servants stood on the periphery in the cold. Inequality was not only legal, but also thermal, visible and tangible to everyone on their own skin, which reinforced the hierarchy through the physical discomfort of the lower classes and the comfort of the upper classes, making the social order as natural and inevitable as the laws of nature. However, despite its impressive gigantic size and consumption of firewood, such an open hearth or even a fireplace was an extremely, depressingly inefficient space heater with an efficiency of about 10–15%. The vast majority of the precious heat literally flew uselessly up the chimney, along with hot smoke and air into the atmosphere. It was only possible to really warm up and feel comfortable when standing in close proximity to the fire within a radius of 1 meter. Outside this zone, the temperature dropped dramatically. The rest of the huge hall remained freezing, even with the hearth burning. The heat did not spread, but rose upwards according to the laws of convection, making the heating localized rather than volumetric, which was a fundamental disadvantage of open hearths, unable to heat large rooms evenly. At the same time, the fireplace paradoxically created a powerful, unpleasant draft that made the situation worse. The huge fireplace with its strong draft actively pulled all the warm air from the room up into the chimney like a pump, and in its place, icy outside air inevitably entered through numerous cracks in the windows, doors, and walls, creating circulation. Paradoxically, the back of a person sitting with their back to the hall and facing the fire could literally freeze from the cold draft, while their face was simultaneously burning and reddening from the unbearable heat of the flames. It was torture. It was impossible to warm up evenly. One part of the body was always freezing, the other was overheating, and one had to constantly turn around, exposing the cold parts to the fire, which was tiring and did not provide the real comfort of warmth that people sought but could not achieve due to the primitiveness of heating technology. The only fuel used was hardwood and softwood, and it was required in enormous, unimaginable quantities. Tons per month for a single castle. The harvesting, cutting, sawing, and delivery of firewood to the castle were one of the main year-round, but especially winter concerns and duties of the peasants. The forests around the castles were rapidly cut down for kilometers over decades to provide fuel for the insatiable hearth, which burned continuously from autumn to spring. What other important functions, besides direct heating, lighting, and cooking, do you think the main hearth in the castle performed for society? Social, ritual, psychological? But even the most gigantic and hottest fire could not physically heat the entire huge multi-room castle with thick walls evenly. In the next chapter, I will tell you about the secret strategy of seasonal survival that forced entire feudal families to roam and migrate within their own huge homes to escape the cold. What I'm about to show you is banned in 12 countries. We are used to thinking that every room in a house has its own permanent purpose, but a medieval castle in winter lived by completely different rules, turning into a dynamic space for survival. The castle's inhabitants practiced what is known as internal migration. With the onset of severe cold weather, they simply left the large drafty halls and huge bedrooms. Life was condensed into a few of the warmest and most protected rooms. Often, the lord's entire family, along with their closest servants, would move into one room for the winter. This could be the solar, a small, well-protected room located above the kitchen. The heat from the kitchen stoves rose upward, providing additional warmth. These winter quarters were much smaller than the staterooms. They were easier to heat with a single small fireplace and keep warm. This is where they ate, slept, and spent all their time. Such crowding was not a whim, but a harsh necessity. It allowed them to save firewood and human energy. There was no point in trying to heat the entire giant castle. The large ceremonial halls that we see in films were effectively mothballed for the winter. The furniture was covered with covers, and the tapestries were removed to protect them from damp. These rooms were transformed into cold, echoing, lifeless spaces. Moving around the castle in winter was quite an event. To get from one living area to another, you had to navigate icy corridors and staircases. People moved quickly, wrapped in cloaks and capes. This survival strategy required flexibility and a willingness to give up familiar comforts. Privacy became a luxury that was inaccessible even to the most noble individuals. Everyone lived in full view of each other, united by a common goal: to survive the winter. In the spring, the reverse migration took place. When the threat of cold weather had passed, the inhabitants returned to their usual quarters. The castle expanded back to its normal size, preparing for a more comfortable summer life. Thus, the castle was not a static home, but rather a seasonal camp. Its use changed depending on the time of year. People did not own the space but adapted to it, wandering within the stone walls. What if I showed you an imaginary time machine and we traveled back to the body of a medieval person in winter? We would realize a shocking truth. The main primary protection against the deadly cold was not the architecture of the castle with its thick walls, but the specific items that were worn in multiple layers directly on the human body every day. Clothing that was properly selected for the climate was a personal, constantly worn mobile heating and insulation system that was always with you day and night. A portable cocoon of warmth. Clothing was the difference between life and death from hypothermia. The castle provided a roof and walls, but not warmth. Warmth was created by clothing on the body, trapping metabolic calories inside layers of fabric and preventing them from escaping into the cold air. So investing in quality clothing was an investment in survival, more important than any architecture, which was useless without the right clothing for its inhabitants. The principle of layering clothing was empirically known to people even then, without a scientific understanding of thermodynamics. The air gap between several layers of clothing perfectly and effectively retained precious body heat, creating an insulating barrier. Therefore, practical people routinely wore several, 3 to 5, items of clothing at the same time, despite their bulkiness. Each layer added insulation, and the air between the layers acted as a natural thermos. The more layers, the warmer, but the heavier and more uncomfortable to move around in. So a balance between warmth and mobility was needed, which everyone found through experience, adding or removing layers depending on activity and temperature, creating an adjustable system of body insulation through the number of layers of clothing. The bottom base layer, in direct contact with the skin, was always a long shirt made of relatively expensive linen, a camisole. Linen absorbed sweat and moisture from the skin well, wicking them away, but did not provide much warmth or insulation on its own. Its main functional purpose was basic skin hygiene and practical protection of more expensive woolen outer garments from direct contamination by the body. Sweat, skin oils, and dirt. A linen shirt was a consumable item that was washed frequently, while woolen outer garments were rarely washed due to the labor involved and the risk of damage. Therefore, linen served as a barrier that prolonged the life of expensive wool, saving money on replacing clothes and making it possible to wear one tunic for years without washing, which was the norm for the poor who did not have spare clothes. The main universal material for warm winter clothing was sheep's wool of varying quality. Woolen tunics, long leggings, and heavy cloaks retained body heat well even when wet from rain or snow, which was critical. The quality of the wool, the fineness of the fiber, the density of the weave, of course varied greatly depending on the social status and wealth of the owner, from coarse peasant wool to fine Flemish wool. The poor wore coarse, prickly wool that irritated the skin, while the rich wore soft, fine wool that was as pleasant as silk, but the essence was the same. Wool kept everyone warm, making it a democratic material for survival, accessible to all classes in one form or another, which distinguished it from fur or silk, which were only available to the elite. Noble aristocrats and wealthy merchants could afford luxurious clothing lined on the inside or trimmed on the outside with expensive natural animal fur. Fur was not only a visible indicator of high status and wealth, but also a very effective natural insulator, superior to wool. The most valuable and prestigious furs were rare white ermine, Russian sable, and gray squirrel, symbols of royal power. Fur was the currency of the North, which could be worn to demonstrate wealth and at the same time used for warmth. Beauty and function were combined, making fur the ideal luxury item that warmed not only the body, but also the owner's self-esteem, elevating them above the crowd in wool, visually and thermally. All medieval clothing was deliberately long, reaching to the calves or floor, and loose-fitting so as not to restrict the movement of the arms and legs, and to create additional large air pockets that trapped heat under the fabric. Long, wide sleeves and hems effectively protected the limbs from chilling drafts from below and from the sides. The head was always covered with a cloak hood or cloth cap, as according to the laws of physics, up to 30–40% of body heat is lost through an uncovered head in cold weather. A bare skull was a luxury of summer. Headwear was not a fashion statement, but a necessity. Without it, a person would quickly freeze even in warm clothes, losing heat through the head faster than the body could produce it, which made a hat or hood a critical element of winter wardrobe, without which survival was questionable in severe frosts. How comfortable and practical do you think such bulky, multi-layered clothing was in everyday life for work and movement? Now imagine the shocking fact that even the warmest daytime clothing did not save a person from the cold at night while sleeping. In the next chapter, you will learn how the medieval bed evolved into a real enclosed, cocoon-like refuge for survival in an icy bedroom. At night, when the temperature dropped to its lowest, the only place of refuge was the bed. But it was not just a piece of furniture for sleeping, but a complex structure designed to retain heat. The most effective was a canopy bed, or a four-poster bed. It was a massive wooden frame with 4 posts at the corners, on which a canopy was supported. The bed was draped on all sides with heavy, thick curtains, usually made of wool or velvet. The result was a small, enclosed room within a room. These curtains played a key role. They blocked the icy drafts that swept through the bedroom. Inside this fabric cocoon, the air remained relatively still and was warmed by the heat of the sleeping people. Mattresses or bedding were very different from modern ones. At best, they were stuffed with feathers or down, which was only available to the wealthiest. Most people had to make do with bedding stuffed with straw, which had to be replaced regularly. The base of the mattress was a mesh of ropes stretched over a wooden frame. Over time, the ropes sagged and had to be tightened with a special wrench. This is where the English expression "sleep tight" comes from. People did not sleep on simple sheets, but under several layers of blankets and covers. The blankets were made of wool, and expensive furs could be placed on top of them. This created a multi-layered protection that worked on the same principle as clothing. Special warmers were used to warm the bed before going to sleep. These were metal or ceramic vessels with long handles. Hot coals from the fireplace were placed inside, and then this warmer was used to iron the bed under the blankets. Privacy in the bedroom was relative. Often several people slept in one bed, not only husband and wife, but also their close servants. This was done not only because of lack of space, but also for additional warmth. People usually slept in nightgowns and bonnets. Lying with your head uncovered was considered unwise, as it led to a great loss of heat. The bonnet protected against the cold and drafts even during sleep. Thus, the medieval bed was a real refuge. It was the only place in the castle where one could truly warm up and feel safe from the night cold. The process of going to sleep was a whole ritual of creating a warm microclimate. What if everything you've been taught is outdated? We are used to thinking of diet as a way to control weight. In the Middle Ages, food served another important function. It was internal fuel for warming the body. The winter diet was high in calories and fat. The basis of the diet was not exquisite dishes, but thick, rich soups and stews known as pottage. They were cooked in a large cauldron over the hearth and could simmer for hours. Everything that was at hand went into the cauldron: grain, beans, vegetables, and, if you were lucky, meat. Such hot, thick food gave a long-lasting feeling of fullness and warmed you from the inside. Eating cold food in winter was unthinkable. Bread was another important source of calories. It was eaten with everything, often used instead of a plate. A piece of stale bread soaked in hot soup was a simple and satisfying meal. Spices played an important role, but not only for flavor. Spices such as pepper, ginger, cloves, and cinnamon were considered hot and warming. They were generously added not only to food, but also to drinks. The most popular warming drink was mulled wine with spices, known as hypocausts. It was drunk by both the nobility and ordinary people, if they could afford it. Hot, spicy wine quickly warmed the blood and gave a deceptive but pleasant feeling of warmth. Ale and beer were also often consumed warm. Cold drinks were rarely drunk in winter. It was believed that they cooled the body and made it vulnerable to disease. Animal fats, such as lard and butter, were highly valued. They not only provided energy but also helped the body withstand the cold. The concept of cholesterol did not exist at that time. Preparing food for the winter was a key task. Meat and fish were salted, dried, and smoked. Vegetables and fruits were stored in cold cellars, but their supply was limited. Thus, the entire food system was geared toward survival during the cold season. The main goal was to get as many calories as possible to convert them into internal heat.
Thank you, Tom.
What modern winter food do you think best fits this description? In the next chapter, we will see how architects tried to combat the cold even at the construction stage. Despite the apparent primitiveness of the technology, medieval builders intuitively understood some fundamental principles of heat conservation and thermodynamics without scientific theory. The architecture of the castle was a complex compromise between the primary requirements of military defense against enemies and the secondary attempt to create at least some minimal domestic comfort for the inhabitants inside. The thickness of the massive walls was in itself a natural good heat insulator due to the volume of material. Stone conducts heat poorly compared to metal, and the thicker the barrier, the slower the heat passes through it. A basic principle of insulation known empirically to builders for centuries without physics, who observed that in thick-walled buildings, the cold outside penetrates more slowly inside, and the heat from inside escapes more slowly, which gave an advantage in maintaining the microclimate of rooms regardless of external temperature fluctuations. Massive stone walls, several meters thick, reaching 2 to 3 meters at the base, had enormous thermal inertia, the ability to accumulate energy. They physically cooled slowly after heating and heated slowly after cooling due to their large mass. This effectively smoothed out sharp daily temperature fluctuations between day and night, creating a stable microclimate. But in winter, after months of cold weather, the walls froze through to their entire thickness and paradoxically turned from protectors into a source and generator of cold from within. The cold stone mass actively drew heat from the air in the room, cooling it by contact, and no stove could warm the tons of frozen stone. It was a battle between unequal forces where heat lost to the cold mass of the walls, making winter heating in the castle almost a useless endeavor, like trying to heat a glacier from the inside with a candle. To combat this refrigerator effect, the interior walls of the living quarters were deliberately insulated from direct contact with the air. The most technically effective method was to use wooden panels, wainscoting, which were mounted at a distance from the masonry, creating an insulating air gap between the cold stonework and the warm room. This was very expensive in terms of materials and labor, and only the wealthiest aristocrats and kings could afford such luxurious finishes on all the walls in their staterooms. Wood was expensive, its processing required skilled carpenters, and installation took months, which made wooden wall cladding a status symbol available to only a few, while the majority lived with bare stone walls that exuded cold all year round, especially in winter. A more common and affordable solution among the nobility was heavy woven tapestries and thick fabrics called arras. They were used to tightly cover the cold stone walls around the perimeter, serving two important functions: aesthetic decoration and practical thermal insulation. The dense, multi-layered fabric significantly reduced heat loss through the walls by radiation and convection, and effectively protected the room from chilling drafts through cracks in the masonry. Tapestries were not just a decoration for beauty, as is commonly believed, but a functional necessity for survival. They created a fabric barrier between the cold stone and the warm air, acting as a blanket on the wall without which living in a stone room was unbearably cold, even with a burning hearth. Therefore, the richness of tapestries was measured not only by the beauty of the images, but also by the thickness of the fabric and the density of the wall covering. The floors in castles were universally hard stone slabs or compacted earth without covering, and they also constantly radiated cold up to the feet. To insulate them from contact, the floors were traditionally covered with a thick layer of straw or dry aromatic herbs such as reeds, lavender, mint, and thyme. In rich chambers, imported oriental carpets, which were objects of incredible luxury and status, could be laid on top of the straw. Straw was a consumable that was changed every week or month when it got wet, rotted, and began to smell of dirt, waste, and decay, turning into compost underfoot. But it was cheap and accessible insulation that even a poor feudal lord could afford, while carpets cost a fortune that only kings could afford, and they were treasured for centuries as family heirlooms, passed down from generation to generation. Windows were the main architectural problem of heat loss and a headache for builders. Glass was an incredibly expensive imported material from Venice, so the vast majority of castle windows simply did not have it at all. It was an unaffordable luxury. Window openings were deliberately small, narrow slits, loopholes, and were closed from the inside only with thick wooden shutters on hinges to protect against wind and rain. An open window in winter was a hole through which all the heat instantly escaped, making heating useless. So windows were kept to a minimum in size, just enough for viewing and shooting, but no more so as not to lose heat, which made the rooms dark but warmer than those with large windows. A compromise between light and heat. Often in wealthy castles, oiled linen cloth or thin translucent plates made of animal horn were used instead of expensive glass. They partially allowed a little dim daylight to enter, creating semi-darkness, but provided very poor protection against the penetrating cold and drafts. Therefore, wooden shutters were almost always kept tightly closed in winter and at night, completely plunging the rooms into darkness or the dim light of candles. Life in the castle in winter was spent in constant darkness, either light and cold or warmth and darkness. The choice was obvious for those who valued survival over lighting comfort, so candles and torches burned during the day to compensate for the closed windows, which was expensive but necessary for life to function in the darkness of the stone bag. In a world without electricity, light and heat were inextricably linked. Almost all sources of light were also sources of heat, albeit insignificant. The struggle against the darkness of night was also a struggle against the cold of night. The main source of light for most of the castle's inhabitants was an open hearth. It provided a lot of light, but only in one room, the main hall. In the other rooms, more compact means had to be used. The most common and cheapest source of light was a splinter, a thin, long piece of dry wood. It gave off a dim, smoky light and burned out quickly, requiring constant replacement. However, even its weak flame provided a little heat. A more expensive option was tallow candles. They were made from animal fat and burned longer than splinters, but they smoked heavily and smelled unpleasant. Standing next to such a candle was warmer than standing in a dark corner of the room. Wax candles were the height of luxury. They burned brightly, evenly, produced almost no smoke, and smelled pleasant. Only the church and the wealthiest feudal lords could afford them. Torches were used to navigate the dark corridors of the castle. They provided a lot of light and heat, but were a fire hazard and were only suitable for large, well-ventilated spaces. They were not used in living quarters. The location of light sources was strategically important. Candles and oil lamps were placed on tables where people worked or ate, creating local islands of light and heat. This allowed people to go about their business without heating the entire room. Long winter evenings were spent in semi-darkness. People tried to finish all their work before sunset. Artificial lighting was too expensive and inefficient to waste unnecessarily. Psychologically, this constant semi-darkness certainly weighed on people. Bright light was associated with safety, warmth, and life. Therefore, any holiday was an occasion to light as many candles and lights as possible. Thus, life in the castle was subject to the natural cycle of day and night. With the onset of darkness, the world narrowed to a small circle of light from a candle or hearth. Beyond this circle lay the hostile territory of cold and darkness. Although cold was a common enemy for all the inhabitants of the castle, it was not felt equally by all. There was a strict hierarchy of cold, directly linked to social status. Winter for a lord and winter for a servant were two different realities. The lord's family occupied the warmest and most protected rooms. These were rooms with fireplaces, wood paneling, and perhaps even glass windows. They had access to the best clothes, furs, and plenty of blankets. It was the lord and his guests who occupied the places of honor by the main hearth in the great hall. They received the maximum amount of heat, while the rest huddled further away. Warmth was a privilege that was distributed according to rank. Servants and soldiers lived in much harsher conditions. They slept in communal barracks or simply on straw mattresses in the corridors and kitchen. These rooms were rarely heated and were full of drafts. Their clothes were made of coarse wool, without fur trim. They had fewer changes of clothes and they were often damp. Servants were constantly on the move, doing hard physical work, which helped them stay warm but also took a lot of energy. Often their only source of heat was the warmth from the kitchen or from animals. Some servants slept near the kennels or stables to keep warm from the heat given off by the animals. It was unhygienic, but it saved them from freezing. Food also varied greatly. While the Lord's table was laden with meat and spiced wine, the servants were given simple soup and ale. Their diet was less caloric, which made them more vulnerable to the cold. Thus, the social divide in the castle became particularly noticeable in winter. While the nobility sat in relative comfort, the majority of the inhabitants fought a daily struggle for survival. Their health and lives depended directly on their ability to withstand the cold. For many, winter was the hardest time of the year. Lack of food and constant cold weakened their immune systems. Illness and mortality rates were significantly higher during the winter months, especially among the lower classes of the castle. Ultimately, the cold was only partially a great equalizer. It threatened everyone, but the chances of survival were directly proportional to one's place in the social hierarchy. The comfort of some was built on the suffering of others. Life in a medieval castle was strictly cyclical, subject to the changing seasons and their demands. But it was the long winter from November to March that dictated the harshest, most rigid daily routine and restrictions. Every winter day became a series of repetitive survival rituals aimed at maximizing the preservation of precious heat and limited resources: firewood, food, candles. Any mistake or negligence could be very costly. Frostbite, illness, or even death from hypothermia or starvation if supplies ran out before spring. Winter was a time of trial for all the inhabitants of the castle without exception, where survival depended on discipline, supplies, and luck. The three pillars on which life in the castle depended for months without the possibility of replenishing resources from outside until the snow melted. The day in the castle began before dawn at 5 or 6 a.m., but definitely not with active activity or work. The first critical task of the servants was to rekindle the extinguished fires in the hearths of the halls, which either went out completely at night due to a lack of firewood or were kept smoldering under the ashes to save fuel. Waking up in a completely cold, dark, damp room was a difficult physical and psychological ordeal every morning. The first hour of the day was spent lighting the fire with a flint and waiting for the hearth to blaze and begin to give off heat. During this time, people lay in bed under blankets, unwilling to get up into the icy air of the room, postponing the inevitable until the last moment, until the fire warmed up the space around them at least a little, making it possible to get dressed and start the day without the risk of hypothermia. Winter daylight hours were dramatically short, 7 to 8 hours from dawn to dusk, and people tried to make the most of them for work. All work requiring good natural light, reading, sewing, repairs, was necessarily done near narrow windows, as close as possible to the light source. Women of all classes were engaged in the laborious spinning of wool on spindles, weaving on looms and sewing clothes, preparing warm clothing for the family for the coming winter. It was endless work. Clothes wore out quickly, requiring constant repair and replacement, and women's hands never stopped, producing fabric from wool, turning it into clothes and patching holes. Textiles were a currency that could not be bought, only produced by their labor, which made women's work critical to the family's survival in the cold. At the same time, men were engaged in the painstaking repair of weapons, sharpening swords, repairing chainmail, repairing agricultural tools, scythes, sickles, plows, and harnesses for horses and oxen. Winter was a necessary time to prepare equipment for the spring and summer active season of fieldwork and wars. Large-scale projects, such as the construction of castles, roads, or bridges, were completely halted due to the freezing of mortar and the impossibility of working in the cold. Construction came to a standstill until spring, and workers either went home or switched to indoor woodworking in workshops protected from the wind, where they could work with their hands without the risk of frostbite to their fingers, which is critical for any craft that requires precision and sensitivity. Physical activity was one of the few effective ways to warm up from the inside without a fire. Soldiers from the garrison regularly conducted military exercises and training in the castle courtyard, weather permitting, when there was no blizzard or black ice. The simple routine of chopping wood with an axe was not only a necessary duty to provide fuel, but also a valuable opportunity to get the blood flowing and warm up through movement.
Heave ho!
Movement generated heat through metabolism, and those who moved froze less than those who sat still. So physical work was valued in winter not only for its results, but also for its side effect of warming up, making labor desirable rather than a curse, which turned the usual attitude toward work from negative to positive in cold conditions. With the onset of early winter twilight at 4 or 5 p.m., all active life in the castle came to a standstill and ceased. People of all ranks gathered together in the warmest room of the castle, usually the main hall by the large hearth. This was the traditional time for a hearty dinner, socializing between classes and telling stories, legends, and news. The oral transmission of information. The evening by the fire was the center of social life. Disputes were settled, deals were made, knowledge was passed on to the young, and bonds were strengthened through spending time together in the warmth, which made the hearth not only a source of heat, but also the center of the community, uniting people physically and socially in the fight against the cold and darkness outside the walls. Winter evenings were painfully long, 12-14 hours of darkness, and monotonous without entertainment. Entertainment was extremely limited and simple. Gambling with dice for money, intellectual chess for the nobility, or simply endless conversations by the fire about the past and the future. Many of the castle's inhabitants simply went to bed much earlier than usual, shortly after sunset, to save expensive wax candles and firewood, as well as to shelter from the unbearable cold in a relatively warm bed under a pile of blankets and skins. Sleep was a free way to survive the cold night and long evening. The longer you sleep, the less wood you burn, and the faster winter passes. So hibernation was not laziness, but a strategy for saving resources and survival. Rational in conditions of scarcity and the impossibility of replenishment, the constant, exhausting struggle against drafts was an integral part of the daily winter routine and a duty. Cracks in wooden doors and window frames were methodically plugged with old rags or collected moss for insulation. Every evening before going to bed, it was essential to carefully check that all the wooden shutters on the windows were tightly closed, not letting in the icy wind. One unclosed hatch or a loose door could cool the entire room overnight, negating all heating efforts. So vigilance was critical. Drafts were an invisible enemy, stealing heat faster than the fire could produce it, making sealing the room no less important than stoking the fire to maintain a survivable temperature. Personal cleanliness and hygiene inevitably took a back seat to survival during the harsh winter months. Washing in icy well water was dangerous to one's health, posing a risk of colds and death, and heating enough water for a proper bath or even a wash was a costly undertaking, requiring hours and firewood. People of all classes bathed much less frequently in winter, once a week or once a month instead of daily, which inevitably contributed to the accumulation of dirt and the spread of parasites, infectious diseases, and epidemics in the crowded conditions of the castle. Dirt was the price of survival. Cleanliness required heat and water, which were not available, so it was necessary to choose between hygiene and hypothermia. And the choice was obvious for those who valued life over the comfort of cleanliness. although the consequences of this choice were tragic for the health of the population. Thus, the entire winter routine was completely and totally subordinated to a single goal: survival until spring. It was a measured, predictable, monotonous life, devoid of variety and full of exhausting everyday difficulties and deprivations. The main and only goal was to physically make it to spring with minimal loss of people and resources, keeping everyone alive and relatively healthy. Survival, not life in the full sense of the word, but existence in anticipation of the thaw. We can see that life in a medieval castle in winter was far from romantic. It was a daily, exhausting struggle against the cold, darkness, and dampness. Every detail of daily life, from clothing to architecture, was subordinated to one main goal: survival. The ingenuity of the people of that time is striking. Without modern technology, they found solutions that were ingenious in their simplicity: layered clothing, fortress beds, and internal migration. They learned to turn their homes into shelters and everyday objects into tools for survival. This experience reminds us of the value of the comforts we take for granted today. The simple ability to turn on a light or adjust the temperature in a room would have seemed like a miracle to the inhabitants of a medieval castle. What other aspects of survival in the past would you like to explore? Perhaps you are interested in how people coped with the heat in ancient Egypt, or how sailors survived long voyages. Suggest topics for future videos in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.